Hey everyone, thank you for joining today's Todd Talk Leadership Podcast. My name is Todd Marshall Hearnsberger. I'm the host of this podcast, and I'm also the founder and CEO of Leadwell Solutions. So I'm so glad you're here today. I have a very special guest. Of course, all my guests that I have on my podcast are special to me, but I have a super special guest with me. His name is Brady Pyle, and I can't wait to share more about him and let you hear from his leadership expertise. So, Brady Pyle is the Chief Human Resources and Inclusion Officer at Space Center Houston. Before joining Space Center Houston, he spent 30 years at NASA, where he led, coached, and supported scientists, engineers, and astronauts, and earned two NASA Outstanding Leadership Medals. He also served NASA's first ever leader of HR field executives and helped the agency earn and maintain its best place to work in the federal government distinction for 11 straight years. Brady has also been blogging about leadership for more than 12 years, and where he's written over 350 book summaries. He and his wife live in Houston. You have three adult children. I know I can probably go on a lot deeper with all your accolades and all the great things you've done, but welcome, Brady. So glad to have you a part of the podcast today.
Thank you, Todd. Really excited to be here and get the conversation started.
And as I said, I'm excited to hear what you have to say. I want my listeners to hear what you have to say because you have so much great information that we all can learn from. Before we get into more of the meat and potatoes of today's podcast, I know I gave just a very 30,000 foot summary of your bio. Kind of go a little bit deeper about your experiences with NASA and how that helped develop you into the leadership mentor that you are today.
Yeah, Todd, as you mentioned, I spent 30 years at NASA. My first 10 were really kind of as an HR representative and internal management consultant. The next 10 or so were frontline leadership roles and leaders of other leaders. I also spent some time, about a year outside of NASA in Washington, D.C. at the headquarters and also at the World Bank. So got a view outside of NASA. Became an executive in 2015, served as the leader of HR at the Johnson Space Center here in Houston. And then in 2018, NASA changed its whole model. We went from being decentralized, where all the support functions reported to a local center director, to being managed centrally. And so my role at that point became being a supervisor of the 10 HR field executives across the country at NASA and figuring out how are we going to deliver HR services. What I've found as I've talked to different audiences over the years is a lot of what we do at NASA, what we did at NASA, could be translated in other environments. And so I've branded myself a translator of the NASA way. I've recently published a book called Building Culture the NASA Way that gives very practical strategies that leaders and organizations can use.
Let's talk about that a little bit more. That book about the NASA way. Pretty much everyone that's going to watch this podcast is going to know about NASA. But what does it mean in more depth of the NASA way?
Yeah, so the framework we use to build culture is something that was not unique to NASA. And it's very simple. It kind of follows the NASA acronym. So we navigate the culture, we understand kind of how our values were shaped, significant events that shaped the organization. So NASA has had some big accidents, space shuttle accidents over the years that really influenced and shaped culture and shaped how we did things. The A is for assess and activate. And so really looking at how do you measure your culture and then focus on the critical few improvements each year to make things better. Pull together teams of employees that can help you determine how to make those things better. The S is around strengthening leadership and systems. That's really focused on frontline leaders, especially, make up about 2/3 of the engagement scores that you look at, and the results are heavily demonstrated by frontline leadership. So we need to make sure we're investing in those leaders, growing and building leadership capacity. And then the final A is to activate a culture of inclusion and innovation. What we found at NASA is when everyone's voices were heard, we could come up with more creative, more innovative solutions. And so that four-step process is something that we used very much at NASA to continue to build a culture. We saw our engagement scores climb from under 70% and then over about a 10-year period. And when I left NASA, we were at 85% engagement, which actually mirrored the what Gallup was saying. The average organization at that point was 15% engagement.
Wow.
So NASA was scoring 85%. And it was because of those methodical processes that we used and that framework that we used that I've been able to take and apply at a much different context here at Space Center Houston. We only have 200 full-time staff and another 250 part-time and seasonal, but that framework is serving us well at Space Center Houston.
I love the whole collaboration framework, as you mentioned in the last A, and the fact that
Mhm.
having your people, the team, the employees, have a voice to give their thoughts and opinions matters to them. And I can understand, and I've seen personally firsthand, because I'm a very collaborative leader. I invite my team to give input in their voice into what's going on, and they may see something that I don't see as a leader. And they may have a better idea than me. And I know some leaders may have a problem with their subordinates having better thoughts or better ideas than them, and that gets into the ego part of a leader. But I invite that, and I have found personally myself where the engagement of the team is so much better. The productivity, the attitude, the culture is so more positive whenever we allow them to share their thoughts and opinions. And we might not take every idea or thought that they give us as leaders, but however, one idea they have may spawn another idea, which is the idea that we've all been waiting for. And so that whole concept of collaborative engagement is so important. And I think a lot of leaders miss this aspect because some leaders think, well, I'm a leader. I'm the one who makes the decision, and I just tell the team what to do and get the job done. How do you see that theory working? I know you've already touched on it, but how do you see that theory working as far as the two different dichotomies of personalities or frameworks of leaders' mindsets?
Yeah, Todd, I think you've outlined one of the tips I would give to leaders over the years, because at NASA you would often promote people based on their technical expertise and their knowledge and very unique experts. And so they would get promoted into positions of leadership, and then we had to really push them to have the coaching mindset and to ask questions, not to give answers. Because if they were giving all the answers or if they had all the answers, they're going to limit their team to their own capability. If they can grow
Good.
those capabilities within the team, they're going to be much stronger. And I would say, Todd, we experienced very much what you're talking about. In my earlier years at NASA, we didn't really pay much attention to engagement surveys, and NASA floated around third to fifth in the best place to work in government because we weren't listening to employees. And then once we started really paying attention to their feedback, acting on what we were hearing, really focusing on those critical few improvements, we made measurable progress. And so, one of the other things we do that resonated with me from what you were saying is to build leaders, we also did a regular cycle of upward feedback for leaders. And we're doing that as well here at Space Center Houston. What use a simple framework of keep, stop, start. What should my leader keep doing? What should they stop doing? What should they start doing? Collect those inputs and then have a debriefing conversation with the leader about how can they improve their leadership. So we're looking individually and organizationally to make improvements all the time, and it's a flywheel that just keeps moving the organization forward.
So there are a variety of different definitions of leadership. I want to know what your definition of leadership is and what's your philosophy behind that. So what's your definition of leadership since there's so many out there?
I'm a big fan of John Maxwell, and I like his simple definition that leadership is influence. I believe no matter what position you hold in an organization, you can demonstrate leadership skills, you can influence. And I certainly saw that in my career. I saw entry-level employees bringing up ideas that really serve the organization well, and they were demonstrating leadership. When you're talking about an organization structure and management positions, you need leadership skills in those that hold high-level management positions. And so really teaching and demonstrating that those influence skills is important individually and organizationally.
In the academic definition that I've learned in my academic studies is leadership is the process of influencing others to attain certain goals. And that's the long definition of
Mhm.
basically what you said. And John Maxwell simplified it so well because I'm a
Right.
John Maxwell fan. I just saw him about a month ago in person and took a picture with him, actually. I'm proud of that. But it's just influence. And
Mhm.
in my leadership studies, I have added an extra part to that definition of what a leader is. It's more than directing people and giving them projects to do and tasks to do and follow up with those people, but it's also developing them to be better at what they do. And if they are leaders underneath me, how to make them better leaders so that they lead better for their team. So I kind of go a little bit above and
Yeah.
beyond that general description of influence. So in the world of the NASA world and your expertise in leadership, there are what I call regular employees or team members, and then
Mhm.
there are high performing employees or team members. To me, they're two different definitions, two different levels. What's your definition or thought of the difference between just a regular employee and a high performing team member?
Yeah, I think my experience at NASA would say we had a core value of excellence. And so people who demonstrated that excellence tended to be high performing. And we saw a lot of those at NASA. We had a high population, I would say, of people who demonstrated that excellence and were high performers. I will tell you, as an early frontline leader, one lesson that I learned was be careful not to categorize people too quickly that way. You could categorize people as your A players, your B players, your C players. And if you do that and you get into that mindset, you get into things like confirmation bias, like me bias, other things that really inhibit the growth of all your team members. And when we talk about activating a culture of inclusion and innovation, it's about growing those capabilities of all your team members. I really like what you said about leadership. And that's certainly something I've practiced over my career is how am I growing others on my team? That way, when I depart a team or an organization, they get better. I've noticed that every position I've left, the organization continues to grow and move forward and get better. And that's ultimately what you want as steward of an organization.
Well, leadership is not a title, it's a process.
Mm.
And I have found that there's a difference between a manager leader and a
Mhm.
leader leader. A manager leader is the one, as I said earlier, you do this, you do that. Here's your project, here's your goals to reach, here's your task, here's your responsibilities, and then I'll check in with you later and we'll see how you're doing. But the leader of leaders is the one who really does help improve others to make them better in their attitude, in their thinking processes, and in just every part of their being. It just makes them a better person. And to have that done, a leader has to be a coach and a mentor.
Mhm.
And there is a difference between a coach and a mentor. A coach pulls out of people what's already on the inside of them that's hidden, where a mentor or a consultant pours into people. So a coach pulls out and a mentor pours into. And I believe a great leader has a great hybrid of both of those responsibilities of not just managing people and tasks, but also making them better by coaching and mentoring them in a way that just makes them a better person overall, even outside the work, even outside the job responsibilities, even making them a better husband or a wife or a father or mother or whatever the description they may be in at that moment. That to me is what a true leader is. Where do most leaders get culture wrong when they are trying to improve the performance of others? Are there some taboo stuff that leaders do when trying to create a culture in high performing teams?
Well, I think one organizations that I've seen observed over the years that get hyper focused on results at the expense of relationships and people, and lose sight of the core values of the organization and what culture they're trying to build. If they're not intentional about that and just hyper focused on getting a result, or in the space business, getting to a launch or reaching a milestone, culture can be impacted. And I think I've seen that over the years where people are less valued. It's a drive for, again, launching the next rocket or accomplishing the next mission without a focus on, maybe the people or the teamwork that makes the culture stick. And so, yeah, if you're not intentional about that, if you don't know kind of your organization's core values, what you're trying to drive to, it's again easy to lose sight of that when you're focused on accomplishing the mission.
The second book that I'm writing currently right now, and the first book I wrote is The Dysfunctional Leader, and I mention all these unhealthy leadership behaviors and attitudes. And my current book that I'm writing is called The Functional Leader, and it talks about, with the subtitle that I've written is Foundational Principles Every Leader Must Master. And these are like leadership 101 principles. From my personal experience, I have found that many leaders who have been promoted to leadership roles within an organization, again, as you said earlier, they were promoted off of skill sets
Mhm.
because they were good at what they did at that level. Well, let's put them over in charge of people when in fact they may not be that great of leaders. And if they would be great leaders, they miss a lot of foundational, elementary principles of what a true healthy leader is. And I categorize these in my book, such as trust, character, integrity, effective communication, and all bunch of other characteristics that make a leader great. In your own perspective and from your personal experiences, have you seen leaders miss their having been fabulous leaders, being average leaders to great leaders simply because they have missed some foundational principles of what a great leader is?
Yeah, I think I've seen that, and I've also seen folks that miss steps in the process. So I think it's really important from a leadership development perspective that you take progressively more responsible roles. So you start off leading a team, then maybe you're a frontline supervisor, then maybe you're a supervisor of supervisors, and before you move into kind of an executive role. What I saw at NASA was people, and sometimes they were visible roles like our astronauts or flight directors who had made critical decisions related to the mission, made them well, made them quickly, and they would move into an executive role right away without ever having the foundation of leading a team or leading people that are under your charge. NASA does a lot of matrix management, so you've got project managers who manage a project, and then the engineering managers are supporting them. And so you're running a project, but you're not responsible for supervising the people. And you've got to have progressively more responsible roles in that regard to succeed. To your base character issues, yes, I certainly saw those as well, where folks had character flaws that showed up later in key leadership roles, whether they were personal greed, personal out for themselves as opposed for the public good that we're charged with at NASA.
So you're in HR and have a many years experience in HR. I've heard the philosophy, and I have a personal strong lean towards this philosophy in the hiring process, that sure, it's important that we hire people who have the skill sets to do the job that we're hiring them for, but it's more important for an HR person to hire somebody more on their character than their skill sets, because skill sets can be trained and developed in a role where character really can't be trained. Do you agree with that philosophy?
That's a tough either or question, Todd. I think you've really got to have a blend of both, and it depends. I would say it depends heavily on the size of your team as well. So if I look at my NASA team, when I was HR director and executive at the Johnson Space Center, I had a team of anywhere from 50 to 60 people. And so in that case, we were hiring entry level folks. We could hire folks fresh out of school with degrees and then train them up in the basics of HR. No problem, no issue. Here, I've got a team of six. And so I really need a certain level of capability. And there are things that I don't know based on my experience. I haven't had a lot of experience administering benefits, for example. So I need someone with benefits expertise. I can't just hire someone who's good character without that expertise because I don't have it either. So it really, to me, is very situational dependent. I think you've got to assess and look at both. You've got to do really good reference checking to make sure that you're not just finding someone in the interview process that interviews well. One of the things I've always liked to do over the years in interviewing is take as much of a day as I can with a candidate, trying to get them tired in the process of maybe answering similar questions or talking to a variety of different people, but getting them to where you're beginning to see the true person. Usually if you have an hour or two with a candidate, they can shine and be at their best. But you spend a longer day, you get inputs from, how did they treat the receptionist? Certainly when we were hiring astronauts and certain folks, the nurses played a key role. Different people were giving perspectives that may not have been part of the traditional interview process. So those are ways to assess people's character as well along the way.
What is the process of your team hires somebody? They obviously passed and checked all the boxes to be hired for a position, only for them to get into that seat in that role for several months, and they end up being more of a problem than a blessing to the organization. And what's the process you deal with those types of people who didn't live up to the expectations that they were given in the interview process? And
Mhm.
at what point do you all say, hey, this isn't working. We need to part ways here. How do you work that process? Because I know a lot of leaders deal with these types of issues where they hire somebody and they feel obligated to keep them, even though they're not healthy for the culture of the organization. And they end up losing good people because the bad people are hanging around and HR doesn't want to deal with it. How do you all work with these types of people?
I would say in the last 6 months, we've had several of those cases here at Space Center Houston. So we had one case of a team member who was actually a really good leader on his team, very well respected in the organization, was getting significant results. But then he was asked to work as a team of peer leaders at a big project that we had here. And instead of working with the team, he kind of went behind to basically an architect that we were working with on an expansion project. And that was a major breach of trust. The peer level team really felt betrayed, and we ultimately had to make a decision to move on from that person. And it was hard for the rest of the organization to understand because he had been such a strong leader, gotten significant results, but it was a key decision about protecting the culture. In my own team, I had a case not too long ago where one of my team members had become very isolated from our finance team, communications team, and even other HR team members. And we started to see some impact to performance. So we were having conversations about that. And one of the methods or tools that we use at Space Center Houston is we do have a severance policy if you go through a restructure. So in this case, we decided rather than working through a long, protracted performance kind of issue, we decided it was time to restructure and offered severance to the candidate. So that's making some of those decisions a little bit easier for leadership because in some cases, if you go down the performance path, folks can do enough to get by, but it's not really serving the organization well or the culture well. And so, offering an opportunity to restructure with treating the individual well as well from a severance perspective is important to us as an organization because we're value people, we're people driven. And so we want to take care of, both the organization, the leader, and then also the employee as well.
I've always heard the phrase hire slow, fire fast, which I understand the philosophy, but I also believe that when we hire somebody and there are problems in the beginning, that we give them chances. We have the time with them to coach them and mentor them, as we said earlier, to try to have them improve what they're doing rather than just saying, hey, look, man, we made a major mistake. You made one mistake, adios, goodbye. So I do believe in developing and building others up who basically are not perfect in what they're doing, but give them that chance. And I'm assuming NASA has that PIP performance improvement plan type of strategy, and to give that person a chance to improve. And then there is the time where, okay, we've tried that route. Now it's time to separate and part our ways. Is that something that NASA does, is kind of the PAP performance improvement plan?
Yeah, so NASA, since it's a federal government employer, there are a lot of regulations about how you manage performance. And yes, you've got a detailed performance improvement plan process. You've got again, a highly regulated, I mean, employees being a US government employee, you're afforded due process. So it's very different being where I am today. I'm working with an at-will employment situation at Space Center Houston. So yeah, there's a lot of differences in how we would handle things at NASA. One of the things that I like to talk to leaders about is I believe a leader's most powerful tool is a mirror. They've got to know themselves as a leader, but when they run into situations like this, situations of conflict or where expectations are not being met, hold up that powerful tool and say, what did I do to contribute and what can I do to make it better? So if we missed on a hiring decision, what do we need to do about helping clarify expectations, helping with tools to help the individual succeed to make things better? So I think, looking first as a leader on how did you contribute and what can you do better, I think are big things to start with in a situation like that.
So yesterday I interviewed an expert in conflict management and resolution. What does that process look like for the NASA organization in having tensions between either two individuals, two departments, and there's a lot of friction there? What kind of conflict management strategies do you all use, and how do you resolve those types of issues?
Yes, there's always a lot of technical disagreements, and those are encouraged at NASA to make sure you get to the right answer. But sometimes those can cross the line and get into personal attack or personal conflict. That's where a lot of cases the HR professionals would step in and help facilitate resolution. One of the things that NASA did well too, following the Shuttle Columbia accident, is set up multiple avenues to resolve conflicts. So if you're having a particular conflict with another individual, you're going to HR. If you're having a technical conflict, like if you're raising a technical concern that's not being heard in your chain of command, NASA set up an ombuds program. So you could take any issue or concern to kind of a trained ombuds who was trained to hear that and then figure out how to disposition that within the system. That's something that we brought to Space Center Houston as well, just so folks have multiple avenues to address concerns if they're, for whatever reason, uncomfortable raising those to the supervisor or to HR. But managing conflict, you certainly want to give resources and training to your supervisors on how to handle that, but then also have a support structure in place. Hopefully your HR team's got skills to help with that as well.
So there's a upcoming leader that it's coming across your path, whether in NASA or personally. And this new leader is young, maybe fresh, doesn't have a lot of leadership skills, a lot of leadership experiences. As we close out this podcast, what advice would you give to a new upcoming leader that will help them become a great leader at some point?
Yeah, I would start with make sure you've got a solid foundation. So, I mentioned at the outset here, I spent 10 years as an HR rep, kind of an internal management consultant before stepping into management positions and leadership positions. And I think having that foundation really serves you well, kind of earning a technical kind of credibility with the organization, and certainly saw that in engineers and scientists at NASA when they had that technical credibility, they could easily step into positions of leadership. I think the other piece of advice I would give, and if they're listening to you, Todd, they're already doing this, but continue to learn and grow. Listen to other leaders, other perspectives. Try to figure out your own style, your own approach based on what you're hearing and learning, because there's a lot of different ways that you can lead and lead well.
Before we get to the part of where you kind of share your information of how people can get a hold of you, the last question I really want to have is your faith in the Lord. I know
Mhm.
you're a Christian, you're a professed Christian. How does faith play a role as you being a leader?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard for me to speak about that separately because it's just who I am, Todd. It's, I'm a follower of Jesus, and that really impacts how I see other people. Servant leadership probably describes my approach, partly because of who I am and what I believe about others. And so wanting to steward gifts that I've been given, I believe I've got the spiritual gift of leadership and administration and want to steward that well. And I constantly am going back to the Lord and leaning on my faith about situations I face at work, career decisions, those sorts of things. So faith has always been integral to my career journey.
So if people want to get a hold of you for questions, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, the easiest way, Todd, is just reach out through LinkedIn. My website is out there as well. It's outofthisworldleadership.com. A lot easier to get there if you just do bradypyle.com. That'll redirect you to the website. So out there on Twitter as well, at Brady Pyle. Yeah, look forward to interacting with folks, engaging. If anyone has questions or wants to dive deeper into anything we've talked about, glad to do so.
That's great. And Brady, there's so much more I know we could get out of your head and into our hearts. I hate that we don't have enough time, but I want to have you back again because I know you have so much more to share than what we had in these few minutes here. But thank you for being a guest on here. And it's been an honor and privilege to have you here on this podcast.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate that.
So, for those of you who want to know more about me and the organization that I lead, you can go to my website at leadwellsolutions.us. Again, that's leadwellsolutions.us. I wrote a book, as I mentioned earlier, called The Dysfunctional Leader. It is published and available on Amazon, or you can also get it at that website. And I'm in the process of writing The Functional Leader, which is foundational principles every leader must master. That will be out here very soon as well. You can learn all about me, all the services that I offer to help organizations become better, do better, help leaders train and development, and all the above. If you'll remember to subscribe and like this channel, that would be fabulous. And we look forward to having more great guests like Brady on here. All you leaders, go out there and lead well.